Fellas, welcome to the new studio. That's right, we've jazzed the studio up a little bit. Our next guest is going to be Katey Rich. She is the deputy editor of Vanity Fair, and she's also the co-host of the awesome podcast Little Gold Men, which looks at the Oscars and the awards season. That's right. So today we are going to be talking about the upcoming Academy Awards on this Sunday, the 93rd edition of it. Fellas, it's another episode of Film Nation. This time, and the Oscar goes to... All right, guys, welcome back to another class. Today's guest speaker is Katey Rich. Katey is the deputy editor of VanityFair.com and the co-host of the awesome, amazing podcast, Little Gold Men. Guys, you need to start listening to that. It is a fun one to listen to. Katey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting.
Well, as a longtime listener of your podcast, which covers the Oscars and the award season and the best films of the year, on this coming Sunday, we'll be celebrating the 93rd Academy Awards. This crop of Oscar nominees was probably a lot easier than most years, as 36 of the nominated films across the board could be found on streaming platforms. And a large part of that was due to COVID keeping cinemas closed. Do you think studios are going to see this as a future where it's a lot easier to see these films? Or once the world hopefully gets back to normal, is it going to go backwards and back to the studios releasing them on the theaters?
I think that's the question that is like keeping a lot of studio execs up at night, because if you're a traditional movie studio like Warner Brothers, like Disney, there aren't that many of them left. Paramount basically hasn't had a movie out all year, but they make so much money off of theatrical releases that they're not making on their streaming services in the same way. So they really need to rely on the theatrical model for some of these movies, which is why you see like Top Gun 2 getting pushed back, or why the Marvel movies still haven't been coming out. Like they really need those theatrical grosses. But then you have Netflix and to a lesser extent Amazon moving into this space of movies like this. We've seen a trend over the past 10 years of television getting better. You have The Sopranos and then Mad Men and Breaking Bad, and you've got the entertainment for adults, and that has kind of like bigger, more serious themes has mostly moved to TV series. And so this year has been the year that the movies that are about that are being viewed at home. And to some extent that feels like a natural progression. And Netflix's business model is entirely built off of expecting you to watch this at home. They're not going to go back from that. They have a bunch of Best Picture nominees. They're fairly dominant in this space. Mm-hmm. So while I think you're still going to see Black Widow in the theaters and, those big scale movies, I think for Oscar movies of the kind that we've got this year, you're going to see a lot more of those at home than you would before, whether that's that Warner Brothers puts them on HBO Max early the way that they are now because of COVID, or because they're all released by Netflix, because that's like the only studio left that's making these kinds of movies. So it's unclear.
Yeah, this was the first time, I've gotten through nearly, even from the documentaries all the way to the Best Pictures, just because it was so much easier to just view them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, when we look at some of the films that were released, we also got to consider a number of the films that were pushed back, and maybe those would have been films that would have done in the technical awards. But, like Top Gun was pushed back. We just had a conversation with Oscar-winning editor Tom Cross, who's pushed back. He was doing the editing of Bond number 25, and that's been pushed back 3 or 4 times. So taking those films that were supposed to come out, we still have an amazing crop of films that were nominated this year. And when we look at them, is this year's Oscars going to be a crop that's going to be like 1996, which, was The English Patient, a film that, although was really good, it's sort of forgotten? Or is it going to be a year like legendary year like 95, where you had Forrest Gump, Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction, 4 Weddings and a Funeral? In other words, is 2020 going to be a legacy year?
I always think of 2017 as a legacy, like what you're thinking about, like Black Panther and Get Out and the Best Picture nominee list. You know, movies that people actually saw. I think Dunkirk was that same year. I get really excited when we have years like that, and I think obviously this is not one of them. Even though the movies have been more accessible than they have been, like I don't think more people have watched. I think more people have watched Bridgerton than any of the Best Picture nominees, maybe combined, and that's okay. Like that Nomadland is never going to be a movie that millions and millions of people are going to go see. They serve a different purpose. I think it's a really good lineup, like in terms of like, I don't think there's a bad movie really in the bunch of all the Best Picture nominees, which is really exciting.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, you know, most people expect Nomadland to win, and I think that's gonna be a history making thing. It's the first movie by a woman of color to win Best Picture. She would be the first woman of color to win Best Director, which she's widely expected to do as well. So I think there's a historical significance to it. The diversity of the lineup is enormous in terms of the amount of Black actors who are nominated. You know, Stephen Yeun and Riz Ahmed making history as Asian representation. So I think that's going to be really important. But in terms of the movies standing the test of time, I think they're all going to have their fans and people who really hold them dear. But I'm not sure that anyone's going to be going to look back at the lineup and being like, oh my God, I can't believe that all those movies are together the way you think
Right.
about like Four Weddings and a Funeral, Shawshank, Forrest Gump, that kind of thing.
Well, now that you mentioned Nomadland, I mean, as you mentioned, it's the favorite. Vegas has as the lead. DraftKings has it the favorite to win Best Picture. It's also the pick to by numerous critics as the best film. That said, when you look at IMDb by the users, it comes in at 7.6, which is a drastically not that strong of a score. Its audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is considerably lower than the critics' score on Rotten Tomatoes. And when you compare audience scores with the other films that are nominated, or just even films that came out, you know, it's being crushed. It's being crushed by the Snyder Cut. It's being crushed by Godzilla versus Kong. I have a bunch of high school seniors and juniors. Why then is Nomadland? Why should that be a film matter to a high school senior and junior?
Well, Snyder Cut's not eligible, so I think anyone who's trying to vote for Snyder Cut for the Oscars would have been disappointed. I mean, I get why it's not going to get the same kind of fervent response. Like Nomadland is not a movie that comes built in with a fan base. It's not part of an existing franchise. It's not even a movie that you know what to expect when you go into watching it, because you think it's going to be, you know, the sad movie about like an economically depressed town and about people who can't make enough money to retire, and it is that, but it's also got this like sense of freedom and beauty to it that I think is really surprising. And I think a lot of times when someone sees a movie that isn't what they expect it to be, it can be really easy to be like, oh no, I don't like this. Like this is not what I sat down for. And I think the trick with Nomadland is to sit down and be like, what is it telling me? Like, what is the movie that's being presented to me? Not what I came in thinking it was going to be, but like seeing the picture that's being put in front of you. And I think, you know, being young and like, I'm not in high school, but, you know, not of retirement age, I think there is a point at which you're like, this isn't a story about me. But I think the freedom aspect of Nomadland is what, particularly during the pandemic, feels really appealing. You know, there's these
Okay.
incredible shots of, you know, Frances McDormand's character's van driving across the West in front of sunsets and mountains and things like this. And the knowing that she has almost no, you know, she has nothing. She's living in her van. She's pooping in a bucket. That's a dramatic scene that, I don't know, maybe everyone would be intrigued by. But she's able to do this and see that. And in this year that we've all been stuck at home, I think you can really feel that powerfully. And I think when a movie can give you that sense of freedom without ignoring the harsh reality of that life, it can have both of those things at once. That's a really incredible thing to see in a movie. And I think it's worth seeing it. It's also very easy to see. It's on Hulu, as you're saying. Like it's something you can kind of get to easily. And just knowing that this movie might show you something you're not expecting, I think everyone deserves a chance to kind of see that and open themselves up to a movie surprising you in that way.
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, it is a gorgeously shot film, and I mean, I would be surprised if it does not win Best Cinematography. But like a lot of my guys, since they're going to be familiar with TikTok, you know, there's a lot of TikTok videos of like van life and things like that, and all those videos painted as a very inspiring, awesome way of living. But this movie shows really the hardness of it, as you mentioned, pooping in a 5-gallon bucket and the fear of having someone knocking on your window in the middle of the night and things. So it's like a little bit more realistic view, I would guess, of what it's like to live in your vehicle.
Yeah, but I don't think it's not the kind of thing where it's being like, you need to see the harsh reality of this world. Like it's got, there's a lot of documentaries that you can see like that that are deeply, deeply depressing. And it's not really like that, which I think is a huge part of the appeal.
Right. Now we've seen, I mean, Frances McDormand does an amazing job. She just won the BAFTAs. She's been winning a lot of other awards. She's one of the front runners for the Oscar for Best Actress. We've seen some really great acting performances this year. And one of those performances, which has been dominating the award circuit, is Chadwick Boseman for his performance. And it's a beautiful performance as Levy in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Now, my question for you is this: had Chadwick Boseman not lost his battle and such an awesome fight that he made, and he was inspiration to a lot of us here as he was continuing on, had he not lost that battle and was still around with us, do you think instead of him being the favorite, would it maybe have gone to Anthony Hopkins, who did just win the BAFTAs, or Riz Ahmed, as you mentioned earlier? Would they have possibly come in as one of the leads, or do you think this was Chadwick's year?
Yeah, it's so hard. It's very hard for someone to ever come into an Oscar race and be like, nope, this is their year. Like to have it just kind of happen from the very beginning. And that does happen from time to time. Like last year, it was really Laura Dern and Renee Zellweger just like marching through every single award ceremony. And that, it's kind of even hard to know why that happened. Well, I saw Ma Rainey last summer, fairly early on, and kind of by then we knew that Chadwick Boseman had died. But even when I saw it, I was like, this would have been a big deal even if he hadn't died. Like it is such a huge performance. There's so much to it. And he was such an icon already. I mean, from Black Panther, even before then, I think everyone knew he had so much great work to give in his career. And his performance as Black Panther is iconic and will be forever. But I think Ma Rainey shows even more of what he can do and what the power that he can bring and how committed he is. And you watch it and you see that he's really thin in the movie, and the people he was working with at the time didn't even know that he had cancer. And you watch what he's like going through on the set every day to do that performance. But I think he would have been, oh, sorry about that. I think he would have been part of that conversation no matter what. But it is interesting that he's part of a really good Best Actor lineup. Like Anthony Hopkins gives this amazing performance in The Father, which is a movie that sounds like it's going to be such an eat your vegetables, like weepy about Alzheimer's. And it's sad, but it's so interesting. It's such an interesting movie to watch about how a story can be told visually and how like something can be happening and how really small changes can completely change what you're seeing. And Riz Ahmed is amazing in Sound of Metal. I feel like that's a movie, not to presume what high school students would like, but I feel like Sound of Metal would have a lot of appeal if you're kind of like young and figuring out what you're really passionate about and how it's about someone like learning to lose that and do something different. So there's all these great performances in that category. But I think Chadwick Boseman would have been a powerhouse regardless.
Okay. And I love that you are giving some props to The Father, because I mean, I thought a genius of a film this year.
So
And the little winks at production design, there's as just you mentioned, like, I mean, just things to add to the confuse. I mean, in essence, I believe it's a way of saying, hey, this is what it would be like to go through some dementia. And it's just these little bits of confusion that I thought was so cleverly put in there. So
yeah, and there's so many movies you watch where they'll like move the camera around in a crazy way or make the editing jumpy or things to show someone being disoriented. And The Father does it in such a straightforward way. And you are with Anthony Hopkins being like, wait a second, this isn't right. And everyone around him is saying, no, it's fine. This is normal. And from everything I understand, that is so much what the experience of Alzheimer's is. And it's so clever and powerful the way that they do it. And I just hope more people see it because it is much more than its kind of generic title and sad premise. Right. Yes.
Since we are talking about some acting performances, to me, one of the best performances of the year was the mesmerizing, magnetic performance of Delroy Lindo in The Five Bloods. It was a brilliant performance as his role as Paul, and he was not nominated. Numerous critics list the movie as one of the best films of the year, yet it was only nominated for score, and it's another Spike Lee film. When I look back at Spike Lee, and his career, I mean, I go back to where like Driving Miss Daisy versus Do the Right Thing. People still teach and talk about Do the Right Thing, especially in the echoing of what's going on in this culture of our nation right now, where nobody really talks about Driving Miss Daisy much anymore. That being said, I got to ask this question. Does the Academy, do they have a vendetta against Spike Lee?
Well, don't forget he won an honorary Oscar a couple years ago, and then he won an Oscar for writing Black Klansman. The image of him in his purple suit leaping
Yes.
into the arms of Samuel L. Jackson on the stage at the Oscars because everyone knew that he was going to win for Black Klansman, so they have Samuel L. Jackson, who's worked with Spike Lee so many times, present the award, and he just gave his long-term collaborator this huge hug. And you think that Spike Lee is kind of too cool for the Oscars because he's Spike Lee, he's an icon no matter what he does, but he was
Right.
so excited to win that Oscar. It was really charming to see. And he himself will be the first to say, like, no one talks about Driving Miss Daisy anymore. Everyone talks about Do the Right Thing. So he knows his legacy is bigger than these Oscar wins. But the Five Bloods is like a lot of his movies in that it's confrontational, it's odd, it's a lot of different genres mixed into one.
Mm.
I think if anything, it was mostly a victim of Netflix having too many movies. And
Oh,
particularly with Delroy Lindo, he was being campaigned as lead actor, and Netflix also has Mel Rainey's Black Bottom and Chadwick Boseman, who's also into Five Bloods. And I think they have to at some point pick like what they're going to put the most weight behind, and they certainly campaigned to Five Bloods, but I think it was not a movie for everybody. It was not a movie that people seem to embrace as readily as Mank or Ma Rainey or
okay.
the other Netflix movies, Pieces of a Woman. I'm missing a big one. Anyway, Netflix had a lot going on, and
Right.
I think that plus To Five Bloods being a little alienating in its way might have contributed to that. And Delroy Lindo is amazing in it. I agree. I hope this means he has another nomination coming, given the attention he's gotten for this movie.
Just springboarding off this, that you were talking about the studio, like Netflix has a lot. So just for some clarification, it's the studio that campaigns, correct?
Yes.
So have you got any feedback from the studio of Warner Brothers on then why they might have campaigned, or were they ones that campaigned to put both actors in the supporting role for Judas and the Black Messiah?
They did not. They campaigned the opposite. They had Lakeith
Okay.
Stanfield in lead and Daniel Kaluuya in supporting. And as far as I know, they were as surprised as anyone when both
Okay.
of them were nominated in supporting. And it's there's some technical ways that Oscar votes work that made that possible. And what it suggests is that a lot of people voted for both of them in both categories, and they had the most votes in supporting, which is great. It shows a lot of support for this really great movie within the Academy.
Wonderful movie. And I just worry, I hope it doesn't, but I worry that they're each going to cancel each other out since they're in the same category.
Daniel Kaluuya has won a lot of awards, so I think he is in good shape to win. That is what I'm hoping as well, because I have also worried about them canceling each other out, but I think Daniel Kaluuya will win.
And Lakeith was clear to me, was a much more clear lead actor in that role. I mean,
I
after
agree.
all.
I think they're both leads, but I don't have a problem with Daniel Kaluuya winning and supporting.
Okay. Now I've told my guys in class that my favorite genre is the horror genre. I mean, to me, there is something very special about feeling your heart racing when you're watching a movie. You know, Alfred Hitchcock said the very first game that we play with as a kid is peekaboo. So, we're used to being scared from our earliest of days. The horror film, though, does not get much recognition. And, a couple of years ago, Toni Collette, for her performance in Hereditary, was amazing. And nobody was really giving her a lot of credit for that great role. Horror lovers such as myself believe because genre just gets overlooked. We're seeing a current indie horror boom, some great horror films on the indie level. What stops the Academy from going ahead and recognizing these types of films?
I think there's just this weird hang up that like the theme of horror can feel not prestigious enough for the Oscars, or not like they're as serious as a film, which I think anyone who's seen great horror films would disagree with. And horror does have a track record with the Oscar. I mean, you got Hereditary, Midsommar, and every year The Invisible Man, this past year with Elizabeth Moss, she's amazing in that movie.
Yes.
But Get Out made it through a couple years ago.
Sure.
Like Rosemary's Babies made it through. Silence of the Lambs. It's kind of probably the iconic horror Best Picture winner. So I think it just needs to have kind of it needs to have everything going right for it, like more so than like prestigious drama that will kind of automatically get Oscar recognition. Like a horror film needs to come out and have critics lobby for it, and have a campaign that's so good that no one can deny it, to be able to break that barrier. And it's definitely not fair, but I think Also, it means that horror fans like yourself, you get to like be the cool kids who noticed it earlier. And then whenever the Oscars finally decide to recognize it, you could be like, yeah, all right, now you agree with me. I've been trying to make this happen for years. You get to take all the credit.
Um, well, I mean, it for me, horror films make you have a more sense of alive than a lot of dramas do. But again, going back to some of the movies this year, such as Promising Young Woman, which played with my emotions from the get go. I was like,
Definitely some horror elements in Promising Young Woman.
yeah. I mean, that movie made me uncomfortable. Then it made me like, oh, wow, she's clever. And then it made me very angry. And then it made me giddy at the
Mhm.
end. So, I mean, it's, so yes, the dramas are able to manage to move as well. When we look at films, though, like as you mentioned, Nomadland, which we already talked a little bit about earlier, it's being one of the front runners. It sort of recycles what we've seen in the last 7 years. If you compare like the last 7 years or combine the last 7 years best picture winners for their box office take, that comes up to about $375 million. I would probably say only 5% of my students maybe even saw one of those films because they're just not films that have, as by the numbers, really appeal to a broad audience. When it makes 375, that's the same kind of money for the most part Avengers makes in the opening weekend.
Yeah.
So the question I get from a lot of my students as I tell them, hey, I want you to pay attention to the Oscars is why do I need to pay attention to this? I don't know any of the movies. I'm not seen them. And the movies that they see are the bigger box office hits. With that in mind, should the Oscars maybe to bring in more of an audience and watching it, add another category that's dealing with like maybe a more well-recognized film for
Well, they still might. They talked about doing it a couple years ago and then kind of
okay.
scrapped that plan for the best popular film Oscar. And they kind of never got far enough into defining what that would mean. I think that's always their desire. They want people to watch the show.
Mhm.
They want the movies that they reward to feel relevant. And for me, the most exciting Oscar wins are when they're movies that break the when Titanic wins, when Lord of the Rings wins. But Parasite last year was a smaller movie, but it was a huge box office success, especially by the standards of a foreign film. That movie like really struck a nerve with an audience way more than like Green Book or The Hurt Locker. There's, much smaller impact films. I mean, I always want them to be in the mix. Like I think the fact that we have a 10 wide potential best picture field always will give you room to have a potential blockbuster in there. Not this year because they weren't really out there, but kind of
Right.
every year, like a Christopher Nolan movie or Get Out or Black Panther or in 2012, like Lincoln made up more than $100 million. There's lots of movies in lots of different formats that can be hits in this way. But I think the Oscars don't have to. I think they can fundamentally raise the profile of something that deserves attention. Ideally, the best picture winner is going to be something that will pull on your heartstrings and feel exciting and feel moving the way that Avengers Endgame does. Like Moonlight does that, even though it made a lot less money. And so hopefully, if you're like, I like movies, I like the Avengers movies, I like, going through the range of emotions with them, you can look at the best picture winner and say, oh, maybe that's a different version of that I can do. Like, hopefully it brings that spotlight onto these films that aren't going to have the $300 million opening weekend automatically that need that boost.
So we are talking about films that do deserve a spotlight, and you just mentioned some films such as Moonlight, which, by the way, its Oscar win was probably the most memorable time.
It's like one of the most exciting things that's ever happened on live television. And like, what more do you want?
So no, there's been a mistake. Moonlight, you've won. And it is a very powerful, pulling, moving film. So for my students, why should my students then view as the Oscars, even though more than likely they're not going to be familiar with the films that are nominated, the majority of them, why should they see the Oscars as culturally important as a student of film?
I mean, this year, I think you're going to get to see people together in a space for the first time in over a year on television. Like the kind of thrill of watching Brad Pitt be in the same room as Zendaya or something like that is something that we haven't had. And I'm extremely excited to see how it comes together. And I think watching the Oscars, you get a sense of the people who make the movies. Like I think, especially if you're a student of film, to see the art directors and composers and the animators and the people who actually make these things happen, they're not speaking into a microphone every weekend. They are people. Like the idea that you can have a role in the movie industry that is not being a director or an actor, I think is really important, and it's hard to grasp onto if you're just not paying attention to the way that movies are made. Um, and yeah, you get to watch and like see clips from the movies and see the actors and be like, oh, that person gave a good speech. I might want to see it. It's like a sampler platter for all the movies from the previous year. And you can say, oh, looks bad. I don't want to watch that. And that's also fine. You can kind of learn what your taste might be from being exposed to stuff that you might not have heard of before.
All right. Well, thank you, Katey, on this part. I appreciate your insight that you have shared with the importance of the Oscars and some of your understanding of these films that have done so well this year and the acting performances of the year. And hopefully, guys, you will be willing to check them out. So, Katey, we've come done through the end of this portion, but we're now to the point of a part what we call 5 quick questions. It's just a little game that we do. I will ask you a question. You come up with the answer as quick as possibly as you can. Are you ready to play?
Yeah, that's right.
All right, here we go. Question 1, the Oscars have been sinking in ratings here over the last couple of years. It's a long-running award show. So, Katey, I'm giving you the pick of either the director or the producer that you would like to see to go in and completely revamp the show. Who would it be and why?
I mean, I might have said Steven Soderbergh, and he's producing the show this year. Everybody in Hollywood, he knows how to move the camera through a tight space and make things on a budget and be inventive with spaces. And I think that's probably what he's going to do this year. So yeah, let's give it to Steven Soderbergh and see how he does.
All right. Question 2, action filmmaking doesn't typically get a lot of fanfare or love at the Oscars, save for some of the technical categories. But despite that, there's still maybe one category missing from the Oscars, and that is the category of stunt work. There's no recognition of it at the Academy. A stunts category could be a way for the Oscars to be more inclusive of box office action, possibly. Does there need to be an Oscar for the category of stunts?
Totally. I think that'd be such a no-brainer for all the reasons that you listed, and because the work that they do is amazing. It's not always as visible as it is in others, but you think about like Mad Max Fury Road, like that movie went to Oscars, and the stunts in that movie are mind-boggling. And also one up, I think they should have one for casting too. I think casting directors are a huge part of movies and don't have an Oscar category and should have one.
Do you think there will, I mean, I know there's some of the award circuit that do like a cast. Is the Oscars ever going to throw something in like a cast?
I don't know if they would do like an ensemble prize the way that the SAG Awards does, but I think casting. I think, you nominate the person who put together the cast of like these ideal ensembles and let the casting directors decide who did the best work there. I think that'd be great.
Okay. Question number 3 for you. I'm going to give you a magical script. It is guaranteed Oscar gold. The only catch is the actor or actress who you choose in it cannot have ever won an Oscar before, but as soon as you give it to them, they're going to win an Oscar. So, no problem. So, who are you going to give this magical script, the actor or actress that has not ever won one, but your script's going to make it to where they can?
You know who's on my brain for some reason is Jude Law. Jude Law has been so good in so many different kinds of movies for so long. He was in The Nest this past year and was amazing in it, and both he and his co-star Carrie Coon both deserved better recognition. I feel like he's just one great role away from winning that Oscar, and I would be delighted to make that happen.
and he's, I mean, it's a broad spectrum if you look back at his career of the films he's done, and you're absolutely right. So,
yeah, and he's still doing great stuff, so I really feel like it's only a matter of time.
I concur with this one there. What film or filmmaker, question 4, that your gut says probably is not going to win this year, but you really, really wish it would win?
Ooh. I think Minari might be that movie for me, and I don't know that it's not going to win anything. I think Yu Jung-yun is a pretty good chance for a supporting actress, but I think Minari would be a great Best Picture winner because it's such a great American story. It's like, you know, a classic frontier thing with this added element of these immigrants, and it's got these elements of Korean culture coming into it. Lee Isaac Chung is such an exciting filmmaker. I think he's going to go on and do great things. But as much as I love Nomadland, I think Minari would be my number 2 pick from that group.
All right. All right, and now finally, your 5th question. Who would you want to sit with next to at the Oscars?
Ooh, like anyone who, like,
Anyone.
nominated or not nominated?
Anyone that you would want.
You know, Reese Witherspoon seems like she'd be fun and would know everybody. Like, you want someone who's gonna like introduce you to someone who's walking by. So like, you know, when Brad Pitt passes, she'll be like, hey, come over here. And I think she'd have good gossip. Like, you know, if she's not like on the record in an interview, she'd really tell you what's going on. So she might be my pick.
I think that's a good pick. Well thought of. Katey Rich, you have played 5 quick questions. You have given us great understanding of the Oscars this year. Thank you so much for being a part of the class today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Thanks, Katey.
And I hope your students watch the Oscars.
Thank you, Katey, so much for sharing your insight, your insider knowledge of the Oscars, and some of your thoughts on these amazing films. Films that some of my guys you might not see, but she's given us a reason to at least consider watching them. And we definitely have more reasons of knowing why we should watch the Oscars. Guys, I think this was a great group of films. The 8 that are nominated for Best Picture, as well as down the ballot, there are some amazing performances. I do hope you utilize the week to get some extra credit in and watch a few of these. But until then, remain awesome. Be nice. Stay safe. And the Oscar goes to